Give my wife your room or pack your bags. That's what my son said right there in the middle of dinner while I was passing him the roasted chicken he'd asked for. My hand stopped mid-air fork, trembling above my plate. The table went dead quiet. The clinking of utensils stopped. The only sound was the hum of the overhead light. Dean didn't look up from his plate. Celine kept her eyes fixed on her wine glass, the corners of her mouth twitching like she was holding back a laugh. Across from them, their friends Ryan and Beth froze in mid-bite, pretending they hadn't heard. I stared at my son. I waited for him to realize what he'd just said, to walk it back, to say it was a joke. He just kept cutting into his food like we were discussing something as casual as salt. I placed my fork down, gently, aligning it with the knife like I always did. For a moment, I wondered if I should say something, ask what brought this on, or why it had to be tonight in front of guests. But I could already see it in Dean's face. This wasn't a sudden decision. This had been discussed, decided. I just hadn't been included. Celine stood to clear a few empty bowls, her manicured fingers brushing past mine like I wasn't even there. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood. No one asked where I was going. No one offered to talk privately. Dean just muttered something about needing the office to stay an office, as though that justified turning his mother out of her room. I walked upstairs past the hallway photos that now felt like props. My legs moved on instinct. My hands knew what to reach for. The suitcase was still in the closet, the smaller one. I didn't need much. I zipped it closed just as laughter floated up the stairs. Celine's voice, smug and unbothered, reached me before I touched the door handle. I didn't take everything. Just the essentials clothes for a few days, my medications, the folder with documents I never meant for anyone else to see. Everything fit neatly into the small suitcase. I didn't bother folding things perfectly. The act of packing was steadying enough. My hands moved with quiet precision, but my chest throbbed like a bruise I hadn't realized was there. The laughter started about 20 minutes after I went upstairs. Muffled at first, but unmistakably casual. Comfortable. Not the laughter of people who had just thrown a grenade into their own dining room. No, it was the kind of laughter that only comes from familiarity, from practice. "She'll be back in 2 days," Celine said. Her voice had that brittle tone she used when pretending to be sweet. Dean laughed softly. Where else would she go? I stood still, socks in my hand, heart stalling for a beat. The wall between our rooms had always been thin. I used to hate that during the first year, when their arguments would pierce through at 1 a.m., when I'd pull the pillow over my head and pretend not to hear the ugly things they said to each other. Now that same thin wall gave me the answer I didn't want. They didn't just assume I'd come back. They counted on it. I set the socks in the case and closed it. I didn't feel angry yet. Not quite. What I felt was something colder, like a deep, dry crack forming under everything I had believed still tethered us. Downstairs, I heard the television click on. Something loud and canned with laughter. Someone opened a bottle, probably that wine I brought back from Ashland. I used to save it for special nights. I guess this counted for them. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled on my shoes. Slower now. Not from hesitation, but to be sure I didn't forget anything important. I moved quietly, not because I owed them silence, but because I didn't want them to have a single reason to say I made a scene. I hadn't planned to live with them forever. But when Dean lost his job and Celine's part-time remote work wasn't covering much, I offered what I had left, a check for $60,000 from the sale of my home. I didn't ask for terms or conditions. I trusted they needed help, and I trusted they'd remember that. They used the money for the down payment. I helped them move. Celine picked the color for the walls, Dean handled the mortgage paperwork, and I quietly claimed the guest room in the back, the one that faced the alley and got no morning light. I didn't mind. I told myself it was temporary, just until things got back on track. They gave me a closet with 2 shelves and a drawer in the kitchen that smelled faintly of varnish. When boxes started arriving, new bar stools, rugs, and wall art, my photo albums were moved to the garage. Celine said it was only until they finished styling the main area. I kept my mouth shut. I still cooked most nights. Grocery shopping too. I'd learned which non-dairy creamer Celine liked, and how Dean took his coffee since the stress had given him ulcers. I covered the electricity during the winter and didn't say a word when they added premium cable without asking. The only thing I asked was to be included, to be respected. I never asked to be thanked. Celine started working from home more often. She set up a desk in the sunroom and covered the windows with sheer curtains. She called it her creation corner. One morning, as I passed by with the vacuum, she pulled out her earbuds and said, not unkindly, but firmly, "Would you mind not walking through here during my flow hours? It breaks the energy." I nodded. I stopped using the sunroom. It was easier to shrink than to argue. Easier to tell myself it wasn't worth it. That I was helping. That family meant compromise. I wheeled the suitcase to the front door without waking them. The porch light was still on, like someone expected me to return. The wheels of my suitcase bumped softly down the front steps. I paused to adjust the handle, then lifted it into the trunk with more effort than I wanted to show. The porch light above me buzzed faintly. The house behind me stayed dark. No door opened. No voice called after me. As I shut the trunk, I caught a flicker of movement from across the street. The curtains in the Daniels' living room shifted, and there she was, June, barely 10, with her chin propped on the windowsill and her arms tucked beneath her. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at me with those wide, steady eyes and gave the smallest wave. I blinked, unsure whether to wave back. My hand lifted on its own. She nodded once, like she understood something no one else did. That simple gesture stayed with me as I slid into the driver's seat. The silence in the car felt less cruel than the silence inside the house. At least here I didn't have to pretend it didn't hurt. The road was quiet at this hour, lined with sleepy houses and overgrown lawns. I didn't drive far, just 20 minutes down the highway to the edge of town. A faded neon sign blinked vacancy at the edge of a gravel parking lot. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old air, but the bed was made and the lights worked. I sat on the edge of the mattress, fingers still curled around my keys. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 11:52. I didn't cry. I didn't unpack. I just sat there waiting for the feeling to settle. There was no plan yet. No map. No person to call. But I knew I wouldn't return. Not to that house. Not to that silence disguised as family. I slipped off my shoes and turned out the light. By morning, I'd already decided I'd need to move again. The motel was a pause, not a landing. I just needed one full day without them in my head to remember who I was without them. By noon the next day, I'd already walked twice around the motel parking lot and finished the stale cup of coffee from the front desk. I didn't want to sit still too long. Stillness makes you second guess. So I opened my contacts list and scrolled past names I hadn't touched in years. Marianne Jacobs. I hadn't seen her since my retirement party 5 years ago. She'd worn bright pink heels under her scrubs and always knew which doctors were cheating on their spouses. But more than that, she was steady, practical, the kind of person who always knew a guy. When she picked up, I expected the usual awkward pause. "It's been so long. How are you?" But she just said, "Lenora, I was thinking about you last week. What's going on?" 10 minutes later, I had a name, a realtor named Simon, with a quiet voice and the decency not to ask too many questions. He had a place in mind before I'd even told him what I was looking for. It's not fancy, he said, but it's clean close to the ocean, and the neighbors are older. No loud kids, just breeze and quiet. That sounded perfect. I didn't tell him how I had the money. Didn't need to. When I sold my house 3 years ago, I told Dean I was putting it all into their future. That was mostly true, but I'd opened a second account the week after the sale on Marianne's advice, actually. Always keep something in your name, she'd said, just in case. So I did. Just under $85,000 sat untouched, waiting for a moment I never imagined would come. I scheduled the showing for the next morning. Told Simon I didn't need a long tour. If I liked it, I'd sign. I could feel the certainty in my chest, now small, solid, unshakable. Back in the motel, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Not sad, not angry, just clear. The kind of clarity that doesn't beg for permission. I repacked my suitcase that night. This time, I folded everything neatly. The condo smelled faintly of old pine and clean air. Not staged, not new, just lived in. The walls were thick, the carpet soft, and the windows overlooked a sliver of ocean framed by rooftops and low hills. I didn't need more than that. Simon handed me the keys after the paperwork was signed, his smile small but sincere. "Congratulations," he said. I nodded, not quite ready to celebrate, but grateful all the same. There wasn't much to move in. I bought a second-hand couch from the building manager, picked up a few basics at a local shop. I could have furnished more, bought nicer things, but I didn't need clutter. What I needed was space that didn't come with someone else's rules. The only real box I brought with me was one I'd packed years ago without knowing why. Inside my worn leather journals, 2 framed photos, one of my wedding day, the other of Dean when he was 5, and still looked at me like I hung the moon, and my old copper kettle, the one with the dent on the side from when it slipped off the stove during that ice storm back in '98. I placed the photos on the windowsill. They didn't need a wall. The journals went into the bottom drawer of the nightstand, and the kettle I set on the stove, even though I hadn't boiled water in it in months. Outside gulls circled lazily overhead, their cries blending into the wind. The neighbors kept to themselves. No music, no barking dogs. Just the hum of quiet lives being lived in parallel. I sat on the balcony that night, with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and let the hush settle over me. For the first time in years, the silence didn't ache. It didn't press in or make me feel smaller. It just was. I stayed out until the sky darkened into soft blue, the kind that blurs edges and makes everything feel a little lighter. The phone buzzed once inside, but I didn't move. I already knew who it was. The phone buzzed again the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. The third time I answered. Not because I wanted to, but because I was tired of wondering what he might say. Dean's voice came through clipped and fast like he'd been running. I could hear cars in the background, maybe the wind. "Mom? Hey, are you still at that motel?" I didn't respond. He cleared his throat. "Listen, something happened with the mortgage. There was some kind of automatic withdrawal that didn't go through. And the gas bill, we thought it was on autopay, but I guess it wasn't." Another pause, shorter this time. "The bank's been calling. There's a notice taped to the front door now." He sounded like someone trying to make a mess sound small. Like if he said it fast enough, it wouldn't stick. "I'm not asking for much," he added. "Just for a little while. Just until we figure things out. It's not just me and Celine, you know. Her sister's kids are staying with us now. It's a lot." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the kettle on the stove. The same kettle I used when Dean was little, when he'd crawl onto the counter just to ask if we could make hot chocolate even in July. "I thought maybe you were still at the motel," he said again. "Maybe we could come by. Just to get through the weekend. That's all." His voice softened at the end, like that might make it easier to swallow. Like I'd forget he told me to give up my room, as if I didn't matter. Like I hadn't heard Celine laugh and say I'd come crawling back. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't accuse or remind him of the money or the meals or the years. I just said, "I'm not at the motel." He hesitated. "Oh, okay. Then where are you?" I didn't answer. I ended the call gently, and for the first time since leaving, I didn't feel the need to explain anything. I poured water into the kettle and turned on the stove. The next day, he called again. I let it ring. Then the messages started. First from Dean, short, polite, overly careful. Then longer ones, more rushed. I didn't open most of them. I didn't need to. The rhythm of desperation is always the same. Eventually, I answered one of the calls. I kept my voice steady, neutral. I could feel him preparing for a fight or a guilt trip, but I gave him neither. "I'm not asking to stay forever," he said. "Just the weekend. Just until we find somewhere." "The guest room's already taken," I said. There was a pause. "Taken?" He echoed like he didn't understand the meaning of the word. "Yes," I said. "It's not available." I could hear the offense in his silence, the way his mind turned that into a betrayal. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. June had come by that morning with a watercolor painting she'd made in school. I'd hung it in the hallway and made her cinnamon toast with butter and sugar, something her mother didn't allow, but never noticed missing. She'd sat on the balcony and told me about a boy named Tyler who had pulled her braid in class. That's what the room was for now. Not sleepovers, not obligations, just peace. Dean didn't ask who had the room. He wouldn't have liked the answer. 2 days later, a text came from Celine. "No greeting. Just we're your family. Don't forget that." I stared at it for a long time. The message felt less like a reminder and more like a demand, something to be said, when the meaning had already slipped away. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. I spent the afternoon cleaning the windows and watering the balcony planter. The sky was a soft gray, the kind that settles quietly on your shoulders without making a fuss. I heated leftover soup and set an extra napkin at the table just in case June came by. Then I sat down, letting the silence settle back in like a familiar friend. I cooked differently now. Simpler meals, smaller portions. Just enough for one, maybe two, if June stops by. I don't make grocery lists a week in advance or plan for big dinners. I shop when I feel like it. I buy what I want. Tonight it was lentil soup and a slice of toasted bread. I ate at the table, the window cracked open to let in the breeze. No one interrupted. No one needed a different sauce or asked why I didn't make enough for seconds. The dishes clinked quietly in the sink as I washed them, not rushed, not exhausted. The whole kitchen stayed clean. No mystery spills, no wrappers tucked behind the microwave, no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, just quiet. In the mornings, I read on the balcony with my coffee, watching the light move across the buildings and listening for the gulls. Sometimes I check tide charts in the paper, not because I need them, but because I like the feeling of knowing what's coming, the rhythm of something bigger than me that still keeps time. June came by yesterday with a plastic tub of cookies from a school fundraiser. Sugar cookies with green sprinkles all slightly burnt on the edges. I bought 3. She stayed long enough to talk about her science project, then skipped back home, leaving behind a sticky note that just said, "Thanks, Miss Lenora," in block letters. No one else knocks. And it's okay. I don't feel forgotten. I feel spared. There's a quiet kind of peace in this space, one that doesn't announce itself or need to be earned. It just settles in slowly like warm air filling a cold room. No fireworks, no declarations. Just a steadiness I didn't know I missed. I swept the floor before bed, the bristles brushing softly over tile. I folded the blanket on the couch, watered the little plant in the corner. Then I turned off the lights and let the stillness stretch out around me. In the dark, I walked down the hallway and paused at the spare room. I opened the door just to look. The second bedroom sits at the end of the short hallway, its door always half open. It's become my favorite part of the condo. Not because it's large or bright, it isn't, but because everything inside it was chosen, placed, and kept by me alone. The bed is narrow, the sheets crisp and plain. There's a small writing desk beneath the window, one I found at a thrift store 2 towns over. It still smells faintly of cedar polish, and the drawers slide smoothly when I open them. My notebooks are stacked in a tidy row along the edge next to a small lamp that throws a soft yellow light at night. A single shelf holds my books, the ones I never had space for at Dean's house. Cookbooks, old nursing manuals, a few dog-eared novels I've read a dozen times. I used to think I'd pass them on to someone. Now I realize I don't have to. It's enough that they're here with me. The chair at the desk fits the curve of my back perfectly. I sit there in the evenings, not to write letters or lists, but just to think. Sometimes I open a journal and let the pen move without planning where it's going. The pages fill slowly with small, steady words. Not stories about loss or betrayal, but ordinary things. What the tide looked like that morning. What June said about her new teacher. How the air smelled before rain. I used to think having a room to myself meant being alone. Now it just means being allowed to exist without permission. Sometimes I leave the door open at night and let the moonlight spill across the floor. It catches on the brass knob and the edge of the chair, turning the space into something quiet and alive. I close the journal, slide it back into the drawer, and smooth the blanket across the bed. Then I turn off the lamp and stand in the doorway, taking in the stillness. The room that once belonged to someone else finally belongs to me.